Welcome back, my fellow Python programmers, to a brand new video, and in this one we're going to be looking at Python Basics Part 1. My name is Michael, founder of 2M Python Dev, and my goal is to make you the best Python programmer in the most fun way possible. Let me just give you a quick overview of how you have to navigate throughout this video because it's a long one. First, you don't have to watch all of this video in one go. I'm going to leave timestamps in the comments below so you can go through whichever section that you want. Second of all, there's going to be resources that you'll need throughout this video, so I'm going to either link them down below into a Google Drive file that you'll need to download, or I will just leave them in the comments or in the description where you can just copy them. And now let me tell you a little bit about how each section is going to work. So first we start off with a bit of explanation, either through slides or through just simple examples. You'll notice that I fast forwarded the code writing because I just felt through experimentation and throughout the years that it's not really necessary. You can just pause the video and copy the code. I will make sure that everything is on a big screen so you can see the entire code. And also in every single section there is a mini project that I also refer to as a challenge. So whenever you see this screen with the red bars on the side, it means that you need to pause the video at that point and try to do the challenge yourself. This is a very crucial step, and this is what differentiates me from other, I believe, tutors and instructors, because I don't want you to just be watching my video and copying the code that I do and like, this is interesting. No, I want you to be actively participating and making sure that you fully learn every single thing that I teach you. Also, if you have any questions, of course, you can leave them in the comments below. I'm very active. I will always be answering all of your questions. And that's basically it. So let's go ahead and get started. So you probably already know about Python, but I'm going to delve just a little bit deeper and tell you more about it. Then I'm going to tell you why I chose PyCharm as our IDE. Then I'm going to show you the different areas that you can then proceed and go into after you finish learning Python and the potential careers that you can build. If at any point you feel that you're enjoying and you're getting value out of the contents of this video, please make sure to slap that like button because I need to beat the YouTube algorithm. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So even though you already have a good idea of what Python is, I'm just going to give you a quick overview and tell you why Python is the best language to start learning. First of all, it's very easy to learn. It has very simple syntax that is easy to understand. It's very beginner friendly and it's perfect for people that are just starting out with programming without any previous coding background. Second of all, it's very dynamic. It's widely used in various fields, including web development, data analysis, AIs, and scientific computing, and more. I'm going to show you some of these areas in just a bit. Third of all, it has a large library, not just a larger library, large libraries. So Python libraries are a collection of pre-written code that provide additional functionalities. So for example, if you want to go do data analysis, you can find a library for that pre-coded code, pre-written code. If you want to go into web development, there's pre-written code for that. If you want to go into game development, there's also code for that. So huge amounts of libraries, very versatile. And also it's platform independent, meaning that it runs on all of the platforms that are available, like Windows, macOS, Linux, etc. Now, why do we want to use PyCharm? Specifically designed for Python. This is the first very important point about PyCharm. It's very easy to set up because it's designed only for Python. Second of all, it has efficient project management. It's very easy to run, it's very easy to create projects on, and it's very easy to save those projects. It has a very nice and friendly plugin ecosystem. So if you ever want to open different files, plugins are basically extra software that you can install onto IDEs that allow you to have more functionalities, maybe open extra files like I was saying. And finally, it's cross-platform. Again, you can use it on any platform. If you have Linux, Windows, or Mac, you can use PyCharm. Now let's talk about what you can use Python for. So there are many different fields, as I told you, that you can apply Python to. One of them is web development, like building websites and web applications using Django and Flask. Django and Flask, you can go research them. I'm not going to dive into them. I'm not going to dive into these two libraries right now. But again, these are libraries that you can use for web development. Next, you have data analysis and visualization. Analyzing and visualizing data. It's just like it says. You can use different libraries again, like Pandas, Matplotlib, Seaborn. You can go research these. These are in-demand careers that most companies are looking for, and most of them, the best visualization and data analysis tools, are using Python. Next, you have machine learning and artificial intelligence. This is the whole hype right now. Machine learning has been here for a very long time. Artificial intelligence is a bit more recent, but both of them are AI systems. You can use TensorFlow and Scikit-learn, again, different libraries. Number 4 is automation and scripting, basically automating repetitive tasks using scripts, more advanced than you can imagine. Scientific and number computing. So if you have any scientific research that you need to make, if you're anywhere near that field, you know that sometimes you have matrices in math that you want to compute or multiply or whatever. You can use Python libraries such as NumPy and SciPy. Software development, creating software application, pretty self-explanatory, needs more Python than libraries. Game development, I'm a game developer, I love developing games. I usually use Unity, but you can also use Pygame libraries. I do like Unity more, but if you want to develop games using Python, it's a bit more efficient, I think. So using Python is a great way. Cybersecurity, another great area, another very booming area, because most companies have servers. They don't want hackers attacking them. Just recently, somebody, I think, hacked Sony and then stole all of their data. Another, like even right now, I heard Rockstar Games, the company that's responsible for developing games such as Grand Theft Auto 6, also got hacked and the information leaked and the hackers received a lot of money. You can become a hacker, although I don't recommend, I don't condone this behavior at all. You can also become a white hat hacker, which is a anti-hacker. He attacks the hackers, you know? So yeah, you can do that by learning Python as well. So let's go ahead and move on and start downloading Python. So the first website that you need to go through is going to be python.org/download/. I'm going to leave this in the description, or you can just Google it. Just type in Python download and you should come up to this page. As you can see right here, you're going to have, if you're watching this in the future, you'll probably have a version that's more advanced than 3.12. Don't worry, everything is exactly the same. Everything past 3.6 is there's not going to be much differences. So basically you click on download and the download starts. Now keep in mind, I'm not going to download this because I already have it. Maybe you're working on a different operating system. So as you can see, if you're using Mac, you need to click on Mac right here. If you're using Linux, you click on Linux. And if you're using something else, you click other. Also, you have Windows right here. The second thing that you need to do is you need to download PyCharm. So again, type in PyCharm, download. You should get to this section. I'm going to leave the link in the description again. First of all, you're going to see the PyCharm Professional. This is a 30-day trial. If you want to become a professional developer, I recommend that you use PyCharm Professional. But since we're just beginners, we're going to go for the PyCharm community. Simply scroll down and you'll find it. Free, built-in, open source, perfect. The IDE for pure Python development. Very fast, very nice. And of course, if you have a Mac OS or Linux, you can switch between those three. Download PyCharm. Again, I'm not going to do this. I already have PyCharm. Everything is very, very simple. Just check the boxes. If you have any questions about the download, you can always ask me. Once you download Python, it should be very, very simple, very smooth. Then you download PyCharm, install it. Again, super smooth. At some point, also keep in mind that you need to download Python first, set everything up in there, and then download PyCharm, because it's going to ask you to restart your computer. Once you do that, it should work. Everything should be working fine, and you should get a window such as this one. Now, I've written Z and X because I don't want you to see my students' projects, but basically this is what it should look like. Again, yours might be a little bit more advanced. It's not gonna change anything, don't worry. 99.9% of the things are going to be the same. The first thing that you need to do once you have this is create a new project to make sure that everything works. Once you click on new project, it's going to give you the location of your project and also is going to ask you about the interpreter. Now, this is where you need to be very careful. You need to select previously configured interpreter. If you don't have this option, you can select new and then you need to locate your interpreter. Basically, where did you save this? For example, for me, it's right here. I have Python 3.11 and I also have Python 3.9. I used to use 3.9, now I'm using 3.11. It should be somewhere in the C if you're using a Windows, app data local program. This is where Python was installed, the python.exe. If you chose a different location, then you need to indicate to PyCharm that location. And basically from there, and again, if you have any questions, you can always leave them in the comments below. I'm going to answer them, or you can just do a quick Google search. Your problem has probably been solved by someone. And after you do this, simply inside of here, as you can see, YouTube, you can change the location of your project by clicking right here. I'm just gonna hit OK. All right, inside of the intro to dictionaries, no problem. Python for YouTube, intro to dictionaries, and you can add an extra backslash and give it a name like test project, and then hit create. And if you see this window, then you are good to go. So first of all, on the left-hand side, you can see that you have the main project and external libraries. These are the libraries that will allow you to write and run your Python code. If you ever use more libraries, then some of them will be downloaded right here, but you don't need to worry about any of these. All that you need to be worried about is creating a Python file that will allow you to write Python code. All right, so are you ready? Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to create a new Python file right here. And again, click on the burger menu, I think it's called. So click on the burger menu, select new, and then select Python file. You should see this if you've done, or if you followed all the steps correctly. Hit click. And also, if for some reason you don't see Python, make sure that you've clicked on the test project and then hit new, and you should see Python file. So right here, you are going to be prompted to name your file. You can name it anything, but keep in mind that whenever you're naming your Python files, you should always have an underscore in between the name. No spaces, no commas, only underscores. So I'm going to call this hello world file. Hit enter, and boom. As you can see, we are ready to write some code. And you'll notice that we also have a new file right here inside of our test project that is hello_world_file.py. Of course, .py stands for .python. So it will allow us, or this will tell PyCharm that this is a Python file and we are going to be writing Python, so it will compile it as a Python file. Once you have this, we don't need to look at it anymore. You can either minimize it right here, or you can just click again on this folder. So let's go ahead and create our first Python file. This is going to be very simple. This is just to test things out. So we're going to be printing a sentence, hello world, to our, well, world. Notice that as I was typing print, I was getting suggestions, and this is a habit that I want you to get into right now. Whenever you type any code in Python, first of all, you have suggestions. This is called IntelliSense, and it should probably pop up for you very easily. So right here, you can see I typed in P. And PyCharm thinks, okay, so looks like Michael wants to type in print or pass or PyTZ. So I'm going to type in PR, all right, print. And now I hit tab, and you'll see that this autocompletes for me, and it doesn't just finish the print, it also adds the 2 round brackets. And this is very, very important to do because one, it will allow you to write code faster. That's one plus. Second of all, it will allow you to avoid any errors. So for example, right here, if I type in print without an I, you can see that I get a squiggly red line indicating that this is an error, which will stop my program from running. And also, if anybody sees you typing in print and then using tab and auto-completing all of your code, they'll be like, damn, this person has the skills to work at our company, or he has the skills to develop our software. It just builds up your credit. No, I'm joking, it's not like that. But of course, if they see you not using the autocomplete, they're like a bit skeptical. So make sure to use the autocomplete, saves you a lot of time, saves you a lot of headaches. Also notice that I added an extra line. And when I added an extra line, a squiggly line in here disappeared. I'm going to talk about this in just a bit. But for now, I'm going to add these two double quotation marks indicating that this is a string, and we're going to talk about strings more later on. But in here, I'm simply going to say hello world. And now, once I've done this, I right click, and right here you can see that I have hello or run hello world file. Click on the run, and boom, there we go. We get hello world. Congratulations. Before we move on, let's talk about this little squiggly line that we just saw. So this is similar to the red squiggly line, but this one is a warning instead of an error. So the error, if I right click and I run, it simply stops my program from working. And you can see that sometimes PyCharm can help you solve the error. So for example, in here, it's not PRNT. Did you mean print? Yes, I did. So the red squiggly line is an error. It's fatal. You should always fix your errors. The second one is a yellow squiggly line, which is a warning. This is just a potential problem that can stop your program from functioning. But as you can see, if I right click and I run, it functions really well. So no problem there. So what is it? Well, whenever you see something like this, always hover over it and it will tell you what it is. In our case, it's pep8w292, no new line at the end of the file. I'm not going to delve too deep into what the pep8 rules are, but basically this is a style that the Python developers or creators have agreed that this is the best way to write your code, and they decided that you should add an extra line at the end of this code, so make sure to follow that. Another example of having a pep8, so for example, if you add extra spaces in here, this doesn't look nice, this doesn't look beautiful. So you need to write beautiful code. If you hover over, you can see pep8 white space before the column. So make sure to follow the pep8 rules whenever you can. Okay, so now that we've set up Python on our PC, we've made sure that it works. We've also downloaded PyCharm and tested out how Python is actually working. And you've learned a little bit about Python, how to just print out hello world. Now it's time for a bit of a challenge. And your challenge is going to be to set your journey up. So first thing you'll need to do is going to be to create a new Python project from scratch. Learn how to do that. Make sure you have the proper interpreter set. Make sure that it works. Create a new Python file and call it whatever you want. Inside, print out hello with your name instead of the blank line. Research online how to make all the letters of a string in the uppercase. Print out a few more lines, create an error out of the output, and understand why you have this error. And finally, I want you to take the time to imagine you have infinite programming skills and you create, or you can create, whatever you want. What would you create? So pause the video right now and go to the challenge. Okay, welcome back. So in here, project, or we click on the burger, go to new project, select the file where you want to save it. I'm just going to call it intro to Python, and then make sure that the interpreter is set up properly. Let's see, interpreter 3.11, proper location, hit create, and then it asks us, do we want to make a new window for this or just on this window? Let's choose this window. Okay, excellent. Now we need to create a new Python file. We make sure that we've selected the name of the project. Go to the burger icon, new Python file, hello my. And by the way, if you don't add a space, or if you do add a space without an underscore, the file is created normally, don't worry about that. But it's better to have an underscore. It's better to have a single coherent word or sentence or whatever, and all of the individual names are attached together inside of your Python file name. Also, adding a capital H is not a good idea. So if you want to rename your file, you simply right click on it and you go to refactor, rename, and I'm going to remove this uppercase H, add an underscore, refactor, boom. And now I want to print out, oops, I didn't follow my own rule, print autocomplete, hello Michael. And actually I will duplicate this using Ctrl D. You'll learn this later on. Hello, my fellow Python programmers. All right, there we go. Right click and run. Everything runs properly. Excellent. Now, how do we put all of this into the uppercase? You should have done the research. We click right here, dot. You can see we have a lot of options. Hit tab to autocomplete. And now when we right click and we run, boom, as you can see, hello, my fellow Python programmers. Okay, my fellow Python programmers, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got enough knowledge out of it. And if you did, please make sure to slap that like button. I mean, at this point, you just have to. In the next video, we're going to be starting with everything that there is to know about Python. And we're going to be starting with data types and creating variables. So if you want to watch that video, make sure to click right here. If at any point you find that you're enjoying the contents of this video and you're getting value out of these, please make sure to leave me a like. Let's not waste any more time and let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do in here is I'm going to create a new Python file and I'm just going to call it hello underscore world. Boom. So very typical, we've already done this before. I'm going to just write a very simple code in here and say that I want to print out hello world. Okay, and I will hit enter to add an extra space. Now I right click and I run, and there we go. You can see that we get the following output, hello world. And I'm just going to dock this right here on the right so we can get a better view. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this inside of a variable. So instead of printing out a literal string in here, and we'll talk more about strings in just a bit, I'm going to create a message that is equal to hello world, and then I'm going to print out this message. And if I right click and I run, you'll see that I still get the same output. So basically what we're doing in here is we've created a variable named message and we've given it a value that is hello world, and every single variable is attached to a value. So right now we have a string value. Let's go ahead and create another variable in here, and I'm going to call it message underscore 2, and I'm going to say that it's going to be like and sub, and I will print out message underscore 2. And a habit I want you to get into is using the autocomplete. So for example, right here, as soon as I start typing in message, you'll see that I get options. Multiple IDEs will have these options. This is called IntelliSense. In case it's not working on your IDE and you want to search for it, make sure that you find it. IntelliSense, message, hit tab to autocomplete. Make sure that you apply this all the time. So now let's delve a little bit deeper and understand what variables are like. So variables are basically like boxes. You have a box and the box name is live and you put in 3 inside. So now you have a box called live with some data inside of it. And this is how we would write it in Python. So first of all, we have the name of our variable and then we have the data that we want to put into that variable. So for example, right here, this is an integer, meaning that it's a number. In our code, we've seen the example as a string, and we'll delve deeper into those two data types. So let's look at various data types. First of all, we have the float, because for example, velocity doesn't only have to be 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, it can be 4.8, 7.9, 600.54. So Float numbers are just numbers that have the dot on them, like velocity. Another type is Boolean. So for example, somebody is dead. They cannot be dead equal or is dead equal to 4. That doesn't make any sense. They are either dead, true, or they're not dead, false. And finally, we have the string data type that we've already seen. So for example, my name would be a string of characters, which form Michael. So the characters are M-I-C-H-A-E-L. And then once they are stringed together, you get the output Michael. So let's go back into our code and let's first of all look at strings. I'm going to create a new Python file in here and I'm going to call it strings underscore in underscore Python. So first of all, I'm going to create two variables in here. Right here, you can see that we have two strings. We have these as the variables. The variable name of the first one is single quote strings. The second one is double quote strings. And you'll see that the difference between these two is that on the first one, we're using single quotations, and on the second one, we're using double quotations. If I right click and I run, you'll see that the output is the same. This is a string and this is a string. So why would we need two quotation marks? Well, for example, if I wanted to say something like this, if I wanted to print out, for example, in between double quotation marks in here, I wanted to say Michael said, and then open up the quotation marks, like and sub, you'll see that immediately we have errors in here. Why? Because these are not interpreted as strings. What Python sees is that we started with double quotation marks and we ended with double quotation marks. That means this is the string and this is where it ends. Everything else in here is just some random variables and some syntax. So that's why we would use single quotation marks around this entire thing in here. And for some reason this changed into double quotation. So I'll select all of this and hit the double quotations. And now, as you can see, right click and run, we can actually print out a string that has double quotations inside, and the same holds true if we want to print out single quotation marks inside of our string. Now we have a couple of useful functions that allow us to print out our strings in different ways. So I'm going to duplicate this line 3 times, and the way I duplicate this is by simply clicking on a line and hitting Ctrl D, and it duplicates. So right here at the end, I'm going to, actually let me duplicate this a 3rd time. So right here, I'm going to say dot title, and again use the autocomplete, dot lower, and finally the dot upper. There we go. So now if I right click and I run, you'll see that I get the following. And just for us to differentiate between these different outputs, I'm going to print out or call the print function, and we'll talk about functions in a different video, where I just separate. So whenever I don't have anything inside of the print, it simply prints out an empty line. So you'll see right here, I have Michael said, like and sub. This is the normal string with nothing on it. The title makes every single letter in the uppercase, or every single first letter in a word in the uppercase, like and, like sub. The lower takes everything down. So for example, L had or Michael, for example, had an uppercase. Now it's in the lowercase. Unfortunately, let's try to add L right here. So right now, or excuse me, let's make the L right here on the lower, or let's just make like in the uppercase, and you'll see that it's taken down to the lowercase. And finally, we have the upper that takes everything to the uppercase. Now, another very useful way that we can use variables in Python is whenever we have an input. So to get an input from the user, we can say name equals input, and I'm going to say what is your name? So anything that we write inside is going to be a prompt that will show the user what they are expected to input. So right here, I'm going to print out the name. So right click and run. So I'm going to be asked, what is your name? And you'll see that right here, I can actually add something. So I'm going to say my name is Michael. Hit enter and Michael is printed out. How cool is that? So this is another very useful way of using variables in Python. But if we wanted to actually embed this name variable into our string, we would have to use a much cleverer way. First, we're going to open up the single quotes, and I'm going to open up this squiggly bracket. And inside I will type in name, and you'll see that I get a suggestion and I hit the tab key. And you'll see that a small f is added at the beginning. This is called an f string. And whenever you want to embed a variable into your string output, you would use an f string. And I'm going to say sed like and sub, and I will select this and add double quotation marks. So right click and run, and Thomas said like and sub. And for example, in here, to make things look better, I will add the dot title, because a name should always be in the uppercase, or its first letter should be in the uppercase. So now if I write Thomas lowercase, I get Thomas in the uppercase. So let's go ahead and look at numbers. I'm going to create a new file in here, and sometimes that doesn't work. So I click in here and create a new Python file that is going to be numbers in Python. And I'm going to write the following. So as you can see right here, I created two variables, a and b. A is equal to 10, b is equal to 20. And I did some arithmetic operations. I did a plus b, a minus b, a times b, a divided by b, and then a divided by b, and a multiplied by b. What could that mean? I'll let you guess once we run this program. So I'm going to right click and I will run, and boom, as you can see, I get the following output. So a plus b is 30 minus 10, 200, 0.5, that makes sense, 0, then some huge number. So we already know what these first four are. These are normal things that we learn in school. The divided, what it does is it actually disregards any floating point that we have. So remember, I told you that there is a variable type called float. And float means that we have a floating number. Basically what the divide does is it gets rid of any floating number. And to make this more clear, I'm going to make this into 84. Right click, run, and you'll see that I get 4.2, but right here I get 4 because we disregarded the 0.2. And the multiply is to the power of. So 84 to the power 20 is this huge number. In here also we can have multiple assignments. So instead of assigning a and b on separate lines, we can assign them like this. A comma b is equal to 10 comma 20. And this is called unpacking tuples, but it's something that we will learn further down the line. If we right click and we run, we get the same output as before. Now, a good thing in here to have whenever you're doing arithmetics is to actually have these as inputs. So I'm going to say a, two dots, and then input b, b, two dots. And you'll see that even before we run, we already have these highlights right here. And what could they mean? Well, I'm going to run and I'm going to try to do this anyway. So I'm going to say 15 and then 20 and hit enter. And I got this number, which is weird because 15 plus 20 shouldn't be 1520. And I get a message in here saying that we have an unsupported operand for the str or for the string. So what's happening in here? What's happening is that whenever we're getting an input, we don't actually get it as well what we would expect. You would expect that you get the number 20, but what you're getting is actually the string 20. That's why when we said a plus b, 15 plus 20, we got 1520. They were concatenated. When you add two strings together, they get concatenated or attached. So what you should do is you should convert this into an integer by adding this function around it. And you can do the same if you want to convert it into a float. So now if I right click and I run and I hit 15 and 20, and first of all, notice that we don't have any more highlights. The IDE knows that these numbers are converted into integers. So when I hit enter, you'll see I get the following input and everything works fine. And finally, let's look at comments. These are also very helpful. So for example, right here, I can hit the hashtag and I can say assigning to variables a comma b. And comments are very helpful. You can use them to describe what you're doing in your project. You can help a user understand what a specific function or a specific section of the code does. And comments are also very helpful if you ever leave your code and you come back and you see comments that you've left and you're like, wow, past me is so helpful and he left me some comments in here. So, my fellow Python programmers, now it's time for a bit of a challenge. We've seen some examples on how to create variables and data types. Now it's time for you to apply what you just learned. And your challenge is the football field owner. So you're the new owner of a football field and you need to start managing things. So here is the program that you need to write. First of all, you need to get the name of the stadium using inputs. Second of all, you'll need to print out the name of the stadium in all caps. Get two inputs from the width. For the width and the length of the field, you need to convert these into floats. Because next thing you need to do is you need to print out the area of the field, and this is how the output should look like. It should say this stadium name, whatever you named your stadium, is the field area, square kilometers or feet, doesn't matter, whatever metric you like to use across the palm. We want to build 152,905 seats around this field. We have $1 million. How much will each seat cost? Only 2 digits after the floating point, and this is something that you will have to research on your own. How do I make sure that a floating point only shows 2 digits after the dot? And finally, how much will that be per seat if we get 60% discount? That's very important. And how much money will we save? I want you to print out a full accounting of everything. So I believe the first 4 points are very, very simple. The next 2 are kind of hard. So pause the video right now and go do the challenge. So first of all, we simply get an input of the stadium name. For some reason, it's hard for me to pronounce this word. So enter the name of the stadium, probably get an E in here. So it could be like Champions Field. I wrote field incorrectly. Step number 2 is where we print out the stadium name in all caps. So right here, we'll call it, Champion, and hit enter, and boom, there we go. Champions is in all caps. So right here, I've asked the user to enter the width and the length, and keep in mind, because whenever we get an input, it's in the form of a string, and we cannot do any operations, well, except for the addition onto strings, we convert them into floats. Just like we've did when we convert them into integers, we use the float. This is something that you needed to research. So when I right click and I run, enter the stadium name, Champions, and enter the width, 5, 12, and there we go. All right, so as you can see right here, we've calculated the area, which is width time length, and then we printed out the area of the stadium name. Notice we've used these 2 squiggly brackets with the F string behind, and this is area in square kilometers. So Champions 12, 0.6, hit enter. The area is 7.199999, even though it should be 7.2. Sometimes Python has these issues. Okay, so right here we've calculated the costs per seat. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to comment these out, okay? Because I don't want to write all the inputs again. So when I right click and I run, you can see that the cost per seat is 6.54. The most important part in here was the .2f. This is something that you had to find on your own, or actually the conl.2f, which ensures that we only show 6.54. If, for example, I get rid of this, right click and run, you'll see that the cost per seat without a discount is this huge number, which we really don't need. And by the way I commented out multiple lines is I select them and I hit Ctrl // I can also uncomment everything using the same method. Okay, so right here I created the discount, which is 0.6, which is 60%. I then had 1 minus the discount, multiplied it by the cost per seat, and now I have the cost or the discounted cost per each seat. And then what I did is I multiplied the discounted cost per seat by the total number of seats and got the total cost minus that number that I had. So when I right click and I run, there we go. I forgot to print it out. All right, there we go. So now I output the cost per seat with a 60% discount, which I calculated right here. And then I print out the total savings, which is right here. And both of them I've applied the 0 or the .2f, which means that we're only going to get 2 numbers after the floating point. So as you can see right here, the cost per seat at a discount is 2.62 and the total savings are, well, very nice. We've saved 600,000, which is logical because 60% from 1 million is 60,000 or 600,000. Keep in mind in here, something I did not discuss is the fact that right here we named our variables stadium_name, while in here we named them total seats with S being capitalized. It doesn't matter how you want to name or the naming convention of your variables, but I just wanted to show you how this can work. And also, if you're confused, sometimes you might have large numbers right here in Python. What you can do is you can add an underscore, for example, right here. I can add an underscore between these numbers and nothing changes. Everything works fine. So a quick recap. First of all, we understood that we can create variables and every variable has a value and we can print out that variable. We've learned that we can use the autocomplete using the tab. So whenever you want to print out something, make sure that you use the tab. Very important habit. We looked at strings in Python. So we learned that we can use single quotations to delimit a string and we can use double quotations to delimit a string, and every single string or strings come with very helpful functions like the title, lower and upper. Also, variables are very helpful if you ever get an input from a user and you want to display it, you can use the f string. We looked at numbers, so we saw that we can have numbers, or we can have two variables that are numbers. We can add them, subtract them, multiply them, divide them, divide them. What does the divide do? This is very important. What it does, it allows us to remove a floating point, and finally we can use the 2 to the power. Also, whenever we get an input, what happens? It's a string, so we need to convert it into an integer if we want to do operations on it. We also looked at comments that are a very important tool to display or give context to what we're doing. And finally, we did the Stadium challenge. So, fellow Python programmers, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please make sure to leave me a like, leave me a comment of what you want me to do next, and subscribe if you enjoyed the contents of this channel. In the next video, we're going to be covering lists, which is a very powerful tool in Python, so you need to watch this video. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. If at any point you feel that you're enjoying the contents of this video, please make sure to leave me a like, and let's get started. So a list is a collection of items in a particular order, and you'll see why we say particular order. They are delimited with square brackets, so whenever you see any variable in Python equal to, and then you have square brackets open up on each side, it means that we are instantiating or initializing a list. And inside we have elements, sometimes they are referred to as items. I like to call them items. You can see that we have commas separating these items. And you can see that we can have a list of integers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can have a list of strings. You can see right here we can use double quotations or single quotations to delimit strings, doesn't matter. If you're still not sure how we work with integers and strings, there's a video, I will link it somewhere right here at the top, that you can go to and watch and understand everything about variables and various data types. And finally, we have a mixed list in here where we have integers, strings, floats, and booleans as well. So we can create a mixed list as well. But usually it's better to have just a simple list that has the same elements inside of it. Anyway, let's go ahead and print out these lists. So I'm going to print out this list, and this list. So this one is going to be the strings list, mixed list. Right click, run, and I'm going to dock this right about here. So as you can see, we have this list or these lists normally printed out. But obviously this is not a good or nice way to print out a list. Let's go ahead and try and access the items enclosed inside of these square brackets. In here, I'm going to print and then print out string list, and then I'm going to access an element. I'm going to access element 0. Now, what is the output in here? Or try to think of what the output might be. Boom, there we go. You can see that it's Frodo, it's the first element. Remember when I told you that this is a list is a collection of items in a particular order? That's because the order always starts at 0. So each element in here has an index associated with it. Each item. So Frodo is at 0, Samwise is at 1, Gandalf 2, Aragorn 3. Same thing holds true for the numbers list. Even though I started with 1 in here, it's actually at index 0, then index 1, index 2, and so on and so forth. So for example, if I told you I wanted to access 3.14, what would I use in here? What would I write? Boom, you can see that to access 3.14, I have to access the element number 2 or element at index number 2 inside of the mixed list. First of all, we use the mixed list because it's right here. And 3.14, we have 0, 1, 2, boom, on 2. You can also use negative indexes, for example, to access Gandalf going backwards. So as you can see right here, I used, instead of a positive number, I used a negative number and I was able to access Gandalf. How did that happen? Well, when we're working in negative numbers, we start at -1 right here, and then we go to -2 on Gandalf, -3, -4 with Frodo. I recommend that you test this out on your own. Next thing is, and this is very important, we want to avoid indexing errors such as using an out of index range. So for example, if I try to access the numbers list at position number 5, it's very natural to think that the number 5 right here should be accessed at position number 5. So as you can see right here, the numbers list at position number 5 is out of range. Why? Because remember, we start at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 is the last index inside of this list. When we try to access number 5, it's a index error, list index out of range. So to access number 4, or to access number 5, we use index number 4. And finally, we can use these values, or we can use the values that we get from these indexes as any other variable. And as you can see, what I did right here is I used the f strings. Again, if you're not familiar with f strings, watch the previous video. There is only, then I access the number, or using the index number 0 at the numbers list, which is 1 right here. And then f string 2 at position 2 dot upper. So I added the dot upper to this because I know it's going to be a string from the strings list, which was at position number 2 we have Gandalf, 0, 1, 2, and then I took it to the upper in the room, and this is the output that I get. So we can use the values that we access from these lists as any normal variable. Now let's go ahead and look at how we can manipulate the items inside of these lists. Alright, so right here we have a list of car brands. We have Toyota, Ford, Honda, Chevrolet, Tesla, and BMW. I printed out this original list because I want to see where the original list is and then make modifications to it. And finally, we have this list printed out right here. Nothing too special, just a list of car brands that are strings. We can modify the elements in a list. For example, I changed right here Ford into Audi. How did I do that? Similar to how I was accessing elements to simply print them out. Now I access the element at a certain index, which is 1 in here because Ford is, remember, at position number 1 because we always start at 0, and it's now equal to Audi. So when I try to print out car brands, you can see right here, instead of Ford, now I have an Audi. Now, something you might have noticed in here is that right now the car brands is a very long list, and we can have a very, very long list. And I have to move this out of the way to show you to show it to you properly. What we can do is we can actually print this out vertically. Instead of horizontally. So now I can easily show you everything that I have in here, and when I right click and I run, you can see that the output does not change at all. We can also add items to our list. So as you can see, what I did in here is I used the .append. This is a built-in function or method, some call it method, that can be used to add an element, but notice that it's added at the end of our list. Most of the time you are going to be using the append, but what if you wanted to add Mercedes-Benz somewhere in here, maybe in between the Audi and the Honda? For that you would use something called the insert method. So what I did right here is I commented out the line where I was appending Mercedes-Benz at the end, and now I use the insert at index number 2. So now I should have 0, 1, and then have Mercedes-Benz instead of Honda and push Honda to the right. Let's right click and run, and boom, as you can see, that is exactly what happened. Instead of appending Mercedes-Benz to the end, I actually inserted it somewhere in the middle. And we can also remove items from a list using the delete statement, or some people refer to it as the del. So right here you can see that I use the del statements on the car brands at position number 3. Now I want you to take a few seconds and think of which item or which car in here is going to be removed. Boom. And as you can see right here, car number 0, 1, 2, 3. So Honda should be removed. And as you can see, Honda was indeed removed. So now we've looked at what lists are. We've seen how we can manipulate lists. Now it's time to look at organizing our lists, which is also a very important part of working with lists. Alright, so as you can see right here, we just have a normal original list that starts with 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 9, 2. Nothing too special, square brackets, everything looks good. Now I'm going to reverse this list using the .reverse method. So as you can see, I use the .reverse, so right click and run, and as you can see, I get none. Why is that? Well, something very important that you always have to think about is what do these methods that I'm using on any element in Python actually do. Hover over this and you can see that we kind of don't get anything in here, right? There's no real documentation. You can always click on the link and go to the website, make sure that you understand everything on python.org, but nobody has time for that. We simply want to look at this right here. You can see that def reverse, and this is a function, something that we will learn in subsequent videos. Maybe there's a video already, check it out. And you can see that it actually returns none, and this is why we get none as an output, because it doesn't really return anything. So instead, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to hit Ctrl X to cut it from here, print it out right here. So I am still applying the reverse, but now I'm simply printing out the numbers list. And boom, as you can see, this list was actually reversed. And remember, this is permanent. Once you apply the reverse, it's always there on the numbers list. So you can see right here, instead of starting with 314, now it ends with 314 and going backwards. Let's go ahead and look at the two main ways that I can sort a list. So as you can see right here, I use the .sort method on my numbers list. And again, why did I use it separately, not inside of the print? If I hover over it, what does it return? You can see right here, arrow, none. So it returns nothing. And even right here, you can see that I have a very nice description of what this is. And later on, we will learn how we can actually do all of those things. Or you can go to the video where I've already done this. So right click, run, boom, sorted list right here. You can see that we start from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everything looks neat, everything looks right. But there is a different method that allows us to sort this not permanently like we've done right here, because look, now per numbers list is forever sorted. Maybe I just want to sort it to display it right now. We're going to look at a different method. Alright, so what I did in here is I created a new list of names, Charlie, Alice, Eve, and Bob, and then I printed out the original list, just so we can have a proper look at it. Then I sorted out the list using the sorted method right here, or this is actually, if I hover over it, you can see that it's also built in. You don't need to understand everything that's going on in here, don't worry about that, but this is also another method that you can go and read all about. I think it's called function. Not the method, but anyways, you can see that it will sort out the names list, and then I printed out the name list again after it has been sorted, so we can see what are the effects of the sorted method. So when I right click and I run, boom, you can see that the original list, Charlie, Alice, Eve, the sorted list starts with Alice, Bob, Charlie, and Eve, A, B, C, and E. And then finally, when we print out the original list again, you can see that again it stays Charlie, Alice, Eve. So unlike the .sort that permanently changes the order of our list, the sorted method simply does it on the spot. And if we hover over it, I think we can probably read it in here somewhere. I do recommend that you always read the description of every single method and function that you use. Alright, so we've learned everything that there is to know about lists, almost. Of course, lists go much deeper than this, but this is an incredible introduction into lists. Now it's time for a bit of a challenge. And your challenge is going to be friends party invitation. You're organizing a party for all your friends. You need to do some organizing to make sure everyone has seats. First, you'll need to create a list of names of the 5 people you'd like to come. They can be made up friends, they can be real friends, just a list of 5 peoples. It should be strings. Print out a personalized invitation for 3 of them. So you'll need to access 3 of these people from your list and then print out some kind of sentence where you invite them. One of your guests can't make it. Modify your list and replace that guest. You found a bigger table for 3 more people. Add 1 at the end of the list, 1 in the middle, and 1 in the beginning of the list. And a bonus in here, you need to print out the length of your list. We haven't seen this yet, so this is something that you'll have to go and research. Turns out you'll only have space for 6 people. You need to remove 1 random person and 1 specific person by their name. This is also something that you'll need to research, and I kind of gave you a hint in here. If you're smart, you're going to find it. And finally, time to organize the party. Print out a sorted list of your friends. Now actually sort out the original list. Now reverse that list. So, pause the video right now and go do the challenge. Okay, so this is the list of names of the people or my friends that I'm inviting. First of all, I sent a message to guest number 0. Who might that be? Try to think of it. Of course, it's Frodo because we start at 0. Hope you have the ring with you. Then we accessed guest at index number 3, which means 0, 1, 2, 3. We should have Legolas. Don't forget to leave your bow at the door. Something you might have noticed is that I have a backslash here behind these single quotation marks. That's because if I remove it, you can see that I get an error, and this is something that we've covered in the previous video. In here, I need to add a backslash because what happens is I started with a single quotation marks and then I got to a second quotation mark, so Python understood, all right, this is it, they've written their string, it's done. But no, I add this backslash. This is now called a special character, so I can use this, or I could have simply used double quotation marks around this, but this is just a faster way. And finally, we accessed guest number 2, magic business. Right click and run. Hi Frodo, hope you have the ring with you. Legolas, don't forget to leave your bow at the door. And Gandalf, no funny magic business. Understood? Okay, so something that I did not talk about when I had a very long print and it was not showing up, what I did is I simply hit enter and you can see that a new line was created and nothing really changed. You can do this whenever you want. The reason why an F appeared in here is because I had a variable that I wanted printed out. So on the challenge, I did the same. Because this was a very long line, I split it into two by simply hitting enter, and you can see that the IDE does everything for me. Your IDE might be different if you're not using PyCharm, so keep that in mind. I appended Bilbo because I wanted him to be at the end. I inserted Saruman at position number 3. I thought that's probably the middle. And finally, Galadriel is in the beginning. I inserted it at 0. Right click and run. And I forgot to print out the guests. Excellent work, Michael. So print out guests. Boom. And there we go. Galadriel in the middle, Bilbo at the end, and Saruman somewhere in the middle. Even though once we've added Galadriel, he's no longer in the middle. Later on, I'm going to show you how we can get the exact middle, but before that, we need to solve step number 5. Okay, so step number 5, the length now is, and notice that I did not use the replacement field like I've been doing before. I added a comma and then printed out the length. So 2 new things, the len method, if you hover over it, you can see that it returns the number of items in a container. Now, container in here refers to anything that might have a size like a list. And then the comma right here. So in here, something that we'll talk about more later on, I provided 2 variables to my print function, and both of them, or it's not variables actually, in here it's called parameters or arguments. So I provided 2 of them to the print and they should look like this. So the length of my list is now 8. And remember, we don't start counting at 0, we actually count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So now what we can do is we can actually use this length to access the exact middle of our Saruman, or to access the exact middle and then add Saruman to it. So I'm going to comment out this line, and instead of trying an arbitrary number like 3, I'm going to get the length of my guests list, and then I'm going to divide it by 2. But the problem with this, and you can see that I already have a highlight, this might be a float, and you cannot use a float to get indexes. They have to be integers. So what did we learn in the previous video? How would we solve this issue? Another forward slash. What this does is it divides a number and then it removes any floating point. So now when I run, you'll see that Saruman is more in the middle. Now, of course, because we have an even number of elements, that means he cannot be in the exact middle, but he is pretty close. So this is a better way of finding the middle using the length of the guests. Okay, so this is the code that I've written. First of all, I said that I'm removing Aragorn, and then I went and researched, well, actually you had to go and research a function or method that allows you to remove a specific item from your list. And in here I removed Aragorn. So now, or before I do that, let me just comment this out. Right click and run. And as you can see now, Aragorn is nowhere to be found. But you have to be very careful with this. If you've noticed when I sped up this video, I actually copied it. Why? Because if I try to use Aragorn with a little a, right click and run, I get an error. Why? Because I was trying to remove X, which in this case is Aragorn. X, I got a value error. Why? Because X is not in the list. Because whenever you're using string references, you have to be very careful. It has to be the exact same thing. That's why it's not a very good idea to use Aragorn directly in here. Then I removed a random person, just an arbitrary person at position number 5. So who was booted in here? After removing Aragorn, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Legolas was removed. Now the problem with this is that 5 is not an actual random person. If you wanted to really have a random person, you'd have to import random. So I can import random in here, and then I can use, instead of just a 5, I can use random.randint, and then say that I want a random integer between 0 and the length of my guests. Now, if you're a complete beginner, this might seem very, very scary, but basically what we did in here is we wanted to use the randint. If I hover over it, it says returns a random integer in the range of a and b, 0 being a, the length of the guest being b, to what end, and both ends are included. So from 0, it could be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Why just 7? Because Aragorn is gone, so we have one less person. Right click, run, and you can see now who was removed. Not Legolas, it was Gandalf. If I right click and I run again, you can see who was removed. Gandalf again, hopefully, third time. Gandalf stays here, and who was removed? Bilbo. Bilbo was removed. So, but advanced, don't worry, I just wanted to show you how we can actually get random integers. Alright, so in here I got the sorted guest, sorted them out, and printed everything out, and I also printed out the original list so that we can see that the original list does not change, as you can see right here. So Galadriel stays in the beginning, while when we sorted it, you can see that Bilbo was the first one, Saruman was the last. And finally in here, I sorted out the list. I printed out the original list because I wanted to show you that now it is permanently not damaged, I want to say damaged, but it's permanently sorted. And finally, we reversed our sorted list. So now we start with Saruman, Legolas, until we get to Bilbo. So as a quick overview of the things that we've learned, first of all, we learned that we can provide our print with multiple arguments. This is something new. We learned how we can reverse. Or actually, let's start from the beginning. First of all, we learned what the heck is even a list. We learned that we can have an integer list, we learned that we can have a string list, and we learned that we can have a mixed list. We can also have lists inside of lists. We can print out these lists. We can access individual items or values of these items inside of a list using square brackets and then their index. Remember, we always start at 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. We can use negative indexing, even though you'll rarely use this, but I wanted to show you just in case. And we can use these items that we extract from a list just as any variable that we've seen before. We looked at how we can manipulate lists. We can print them out horizontally. We can print them out vertically. Nothing changes. We can modify a specific item using its index in between square brackets, just like we've accessed it before. We can append an item to a list by using the .append method. What does the append do? It adds it to the end. The insert, we can actually select where we want to add this item, and then, or we specify the index at which we want to add a specific item, and then we add it. And then finally, we looked at how we can remove or actually delete a specific item from a list. We looked at organizing lists. We've seen that we can reverse a list, we can permanently sort a list, and we can temporarily sort a list. We can permanently sort it using the .sort and temporarily sort it using the sorted method. And finally, this was the challenge. So, fellow Python programmers, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you have, please make sure to leave me a like. And if you like the contents of this channel, I have a lot more coming, so subscribe as well. I know this was a very long video. I think I'm about 40 minutes. Maybe it will be condensed, but there was a lot to unpack here, and I hope you went through all of it. In the next video, we're going to be looking at loops. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. If at any point you feel that you're enjoying the contents of this video, please make sure to slap that like button because I need to fight the YouTube algorithm. So this is a list of pizza toppings. We've already seen how we work with lists. If you haven't, you can go to the previous video. I've left a link somewhere at the top. So a list of pizza topping, and we've printed out each element of this list on a separate line. Seems easy enough. But what if we were working in a restaurant and this wasn't just a simple or small list of toppings? So as you can see, now we have a much longer list. And if I wanted to print all of these pizza toppings out, you'd see that it would print out, everything would work the same, but we have to work a lot to print all of this out. What if there was a way for us to do this automatically and really, really fast? Well, thankfully, there is. So, as you can see right here, instead of using all of these lines, which are about 14, you can see that we only needed 2 lines to print every single topping of our pizza out. So what we did in here is we defined a for loop that pulls the name of the toppings from the pizza toppings list, and inside the loop we printed out that topping. So let's go ahead and take a little bit of a closer look. To instantiate a for loop, you need to start with the for statement. Then we name our temporary variable. This variable is then associated with every value pulled from the list. You can choose any name you want. However, it's always helpful to choose a meaningful name. So for example, in here we chose topping. We could have just called this X and then wrote X in here. And if I right click and I run, you'll see that the output is the same. So it doesn't matter what you name it, but as I told you, since we're going through pizza toppings, it's better to have toppings as the name. And finally, we have the in statement followed by the name of the list that we're pulling from. You can do anything that you want with the value that you got. So instead of simply printing out this simple topic name, we can put it in some kind of sentence and print it out like so. And inside of your for loop, you can actually write as many lines as you want. So as you can see, instead of simply printing out a single line inside of the for loop, I printed out I like to have pepperoni or whatever the topping is. Yum, pepperoni is the best. And then I left a blank line in order to separate between these different outputs. So now I wanted to show you what happens when we actually finish with the for loop. As you can see, we just continue on as normal. The program continues executing. Once we've went through all of the toppings, at the end we get enjoy, and because we don't have any other line of code except for the comments which do not execute, we don't have anything to output anymore. So now that you've learned how to use a for loop in order to automate or do a simple task multiple times, now it's time to look at indentations. You've seen indentation, you're probably wondering what these things are that I still haven't talked about, so let's go ahead and delve into them. So you might have noticed that right here we have a bit of extra space, to be precise, 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces behind every single line inside of the for loop. These are called indentations, and they help Python understand how a group of lines is related to the rest of the program. So for example, in here, you'll notice that the print is inside of the for loop, so it's being printed out multiple times. But what would happen if I remove the space from behind it? And if you want to remove the space, you simply hit Shift Tab. So now there's no longer an indentation, and if I right click and I run, you'll see that now the only space is right here, and other than that, there's nothing happening. There are two things that you need to watch out for whenever you're working with indentations. First of all, forgetting an indent. So if I remove the indentation from behind the yum, again using the Shift tab, you'll see that it actually breaks the loop and we have an error. How did I know that there's an error before running the code? Because we have these small squiggly red lines. If I hover over it, statement expected, indent, right click and run, and boom, unexpected indentation, which is right here. The second potential error that you can get is extra or unnecessary indentations. So if I add another indent behind this print and I right click and I run, you'll see that I have an unexpected indent error again right here. And by the way, this can happen to any line of code. So Shift tab, and if I hit tab twice right here, again I get an error, right click and run, and it tells me an unexpected indent right here on the print enjoy. Python uses indentations to delimit blocks of code, so make sure that you use them very, very carefully. And the last thing that you need to be careful of when you're working with for loops is these two colon or this one colon at the end. Make sure that you never forget it, otherwise it just causes an error. Alright, so that was the basics of indentations. Now let's go ahead and look at how we can start generating lists, or to be more precise, generate numerical lists, work with them, and look at how ranges work. Let's go ahead and continue on. Even though Python is an extremely versatile language and can be used for almost anything, it's most known for its data handling abilities. So in many instances, you're going to have big lists of numbers. The for loop combined with this range function allows you to generate numbers in an instant. So for example, right here, what we did is we generated numbers 1 through 10 using something called the range function. If you hover over this range, you'll see that we get this documentation, and you'll notice that we have a start and a stop. But notice something very important. Even though we start at 1 and we've specified 1, we don't actually end at 10. And why is that? Again, if I hover over it and look at the documentation, and whenever you get something like this, always hover over it or go research it on Google to understand why weird things happen. And if we read right here, you can see that returns an object that produces a sequence of integers from start, which is inclusive, to stop, which is exclusive by a certain step. So the start is included, the 1 is included, but the 10, that is the stop, is not included. So in order for me to get 10, I actually need to write in here 11. When I right click and I run, I get 1 through 10. Okay, so in here what I did is I initialized an empty list. An empty list is initialized like this. You just have 2 square brackets on either side with nothing in them. Why did I initialize it like this? Because what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a for loop over a range going 1 through 11. Remember, 11 is excluded. And then I take the value and I multiply it or take it to the power of 2 and then put it back into the value, and finally I append this value, and finally I print out the squares. Oh, I apologize, I append this value to the squares, and finally I print out the squares. So if I right click and I run, now I have a list of 1 through 10, but each one of those numbers is to the power of 2. And notice how fast that is, or that was, for me to create. You might be telling me, well, I would have done it in the approximate same time, but imagine if you needed to do this 1 through 100 or 1 through 1000, or sometimes you might be working with datasets that are millions of values inside of a list. And here's also a few fun functions that you can use on your numeric lists. For example, so as you can see, we can use different functions on our numerical lists. First of all, we can use the max, which you can hover over every single one of these. Max allows us to get the biggest number. So right here, the biggest number is 100. We can have the minimum, which gets us the smallest number, which is 1. And finally, we have the sum that returns the sum of all of these numbers. So if you sum these together, I'm not sure if that's the exact number, but I'm confident in Python's ability to sum all of these numbers together. So we've looked at for loops, we've looked at how we can generate numerical lists using the range function. Now it's time for us to delve into slicing lists. And this is a very important part of working with lists, and we're going to see how we can loop through parts of a list and not all of it. So let's go ahead and continue on. Okay, so as you can see, again, we're back to our pizza toppings list. First of all, we printed out the first 5 pizzas, the pepperoni, mushroom, onion, sausage, and bacon. And then we printed out 8 through 13, which is pineapple, spinach, ham, artichoke, and anchovies. I don't know what these are, I just copied them from Google. So what is happening in here? First of all, as you can see, just like we've done before, we accessed elements inside of the pizza topping using these 2 square brackets on either side. Now in the previous video, we used to use a single number, like for example 5, and we would get the 5th number in here, or remember we start at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we would get extra cheese. So instead, what we're doing in here is we're telling it that we want a slice from these lists. Ironic, isn't it? We're getting a slice from the pizza topping. Huh? Nice. So we go from 0, then the colon, to where we want to go, and to 5. So this is similar to the range where we have the start and the stop, and notice that when we're using the slicing, we don't get the extra cheese. What does that mean? It means that just like the range, the stop is not included. The same thing holds true in here. So we start at the 8th, which is 8, which is, I don't want to count right here, but it's pineapple, and then from pineapple we go to the 12th, which is at anchovies, which we write 13 in order to get that 12th position. You can also do the following. So when you don't specify the start, you just start from the complete beginning. Right here, I wrote nothing behind this colon, and what I got is from the complete start. And when you don't indicate the end, you go until the end. So we started at 12, which is anchovies, and we go until jalapenos, which are the last item in our list. And you can also loop through these slices. So right here, what I did is I created a for loop. The topping is the temporary variable in the pizza topping, and then I sliced from 6 to 10. Well, keep in mind that the 10 is not included, so I only like the following toppings: black olives, green pepper, pineapple, and spinach. Okay, so now that we've seen how we can work with slices of our lists, it's time to look at tuples. Tuples are like the sister or the brother of lists, so they're almost exactly the same except for a small minute detail that we're going to look at. Let's go ahead and continue on. Okay, so this was the list of John's medications. We added ibuprofen, we printed out John's medication, and now it turns out that aspirin and ibuprofen don't work together and John is dead. Don't ask me why, I don't know anything about medication. This is a Python channel, but as you can see, whenever we're working with lists, they are actually changeable. We can play around and change the values that are inside. So a list works well when working with data that we actually can or would like to change. However, sometimes you want a list of items that nobody can change, and this is where tuples come into play. So I'm going to change this from a list into a tuple by simply switching from square brackets to round brackets. And you'll see my IDE PyCharm automatically changes that. And as soon as we do it, immediately we have a highlight over here. If I run over it, you can see that unresolved attribute reference append. There is no append to a tuple. And if I right click and I run, you'll see that a tuple object has no attribute append. Why? Because you can't actually change values inside of a tuple. And even if we try to manually change a value inside of this tuple, you'll notice that we also get a highlight because tuples don't support item assignments. If you right click and we run, you'll see that tuple objects do not support item assignments, and this is the line of code where we are facing an error. And we can also loop through tuples just like we do with lists. So tuples are basically lists that should not and cannot be changed throughout the execution of a program. Okay, so we've looked at tuples, we've looked at lists, numeric lists, how to loop through these, how to create to use the range. Now it's time for a bit of a challenge, which is a mini project where you have to test out all of the knowledge that you've acquired so far. Let's go ahead and do the challenge. Okay, so your challenge is going to be the movie list. We have a list of the best movies. The list is going to be in the description or the top comment, and we want to print them out and manipulate them. So first of all, you need to print out my favorite movie is, and then the movie title for all the movies using a for loop. Next, you'll need to print out the first 4 movies, the last 3 movies, and the movies 3 to 9. You'll need to create a list of numbers from 1 until the entire length of the movies. If you don't remember how to get the length of a list, then you need to watch the first video or go do the research yourself. Use this numbers list to create a list of tuples. Each tuple contains a number and a movie associated with it, and then you'll need to print all of this out properly. So for example, you need to have 2, The Godfather, and so on and so forth. From the list of tuples, print out the movie titles again in a sentence. So now from this list of tuples, you need to try and print out only the movie titles, and also you'll need to, of course, be using the for loops. Research how enumerate function works and apply it to the movie list. And finally, how can this be used to create the same list of tuples more easily? Meaning that this enumerate function that you just discovered, how can we use it to more easily create a list? So pause the video right now and go do the challenge. Okay, so this is our list of movies. By the way, you can use any list that you want, just make sure that it's at least 10. So right here, my favorite movie is the movies, and we used a for loop to print everything out. This is the temporary variable, this is the movies list, and we used the temporary variable as a value right here in our printout statement. Okay, so back in here, as you can see, we've printed out first of all the first 4 movies. I didn't add anything at the start, which means that we actually start from the first element and we print out the first 4 movies. Then I printed out the last 3. I started at 7 because remember we have 10, so I start at 7 and I go until the end. And finally, movies 3 to 9. I printed out 3 to number 10 because remember it's not included. And by the way, there was a easier way of printing this line out. So I'm going to duplicate, comment out, and then instead of 7, use -3. And remember this, The Good, Bad and the Ugly, Fight Club and Forrest Gump. When I right click and I run, you'll see that I still get the following. So how does this work? Well, if you remember in the previous video where we talked about lists, we can actually use negative indexing. So Forrest Gump would be -1. Fight Club would be -2, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly would be -3. So when I write -3 until the end, what happens? Well, you can guess, we print out the last 3 in here. If you didn't do this one, don't worry about it. If you did, you're a legend. Continue on. Okay, so the next challenge was to create a list of numbers. I just initialized the numbers list. I created a for loop from I in range 1 through the length of movies plus 1. And then I appended this I to the numbers. So my question to you is, why did we do length plus 1? Well, because remember, our goal is to actually give each movie a number next to it. So basically what we did in here is we got the length of the movies, and remember the length of the movies is 10 because 1, 2, 3, 4, 10. We have 10 movies. So in order to actually number the last one, which is 10, we have to add plus 1, so it becomes 11, so that it goes to number 10. If I remove this, you'll see that we only go to 9. Okay, so for the next challenge, you needed to create a list of tuples using the list of numbers that we just had. Now, to be frank with you, this is a very hard challenge because what you needed to do was, first of all, you needed to get the numbers list, get the movies at I, and then make a tuple out of them. Notice that right here I created a tuple and then append that tuple to the number movies tuple list. Very simply, I just instantiated or initialized the numbers movie tuple. I created a for loop. The I was the temporary variable over the range of the length of the movies. And then in here, for example, let's call this T is equal to the following tuple. And then I simply appended T. So I created a tuple, first of all, from the numbers right here. Using the I accessed the numbers and then the movies, and I created this list of tuples. If that was too hard for you, no worries, this is a bit of a challenging challenge to do. And finally, I just printed it out in a nice looking way. Okay, so the challenge was for you to access the names of the movies from the movie tuple list. So remember, right here what we have is a list of tuples, and I told you that tuples work just like lists. So 1 is at index number 0, or for example, let's take 8 is at index number 0 of each of these tuples, and the name of the movie is at index number 1. So what I did is I simply went through the movie's tuple, and then I had the temporary variable that is movie tuple. Remember, we store the value of each item from the numbers movie tuple in this temporary variable, and then I accessed the element at index number 1, which was the movie, and I got I love watching Shawshank Redemption, I love watching The Godfather, I love watching The Dark Knight, etc, etc. Okay, so let's talk about the enumerate. So what you needed to do was research enumerate in Python, and you could have used the Geeks for Geeks or W3 Schools. I personally prefer W3 Schools. So if we go right here, you can see that the way that enumerate is used and so on and so forth. But I'm basically going to give you the gist of it. I recommend that you read through this documentation and also you go through the Geeks for Geeks. But basically what happens is the enumerate returns a tuple of the index and value immediately. When I right click and I run, you can see that I get value, I get index and value. And I can also hover over this enumerate and I can see what it returns. And by the way, what we do in here is called unpacking tuples. Whenever we have a single value and from it we set 2 values, this is called unpacking a tuple. Don't worry about this for now, but if you ever encounter it, you'd know that this is called unpacking tuples. And we have the index and the value, and this is how it looks. Okay, so final challenge, which was to use the enumerate to create a list of tuples. Now we've already done this right here at the top, but this time it was much easier because instead of creating a list for the numbers and then having a list for the movies, we can simply use the movies list. We went through the movies list and then we got the index and the value just like we've done before. We unpacked this tuple and then we appended with this tuple. Remember? This is a tuple, we're appending it into the enumerate movies list, and we did index plus 1. Why? Because the index starts at 0, and we wanted it to start, oh no, thunder. We wanted it to start at 1. So, fellow Python programmers, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And if you did, please make sure to leave me a like. If you have any questions, please make sure to leave them in the comments below. Also, if you have any recommendations for a future video, you can also leave them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this kind of content and if you got to the end of this video, please make sure to subscribe. And in the next video, we're going to be looking at if statements. So without any further ado, if at any point you feel that you're enjoying the contents of this video, make sure to slap a like because I need to beat the YouTube algorithm. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so on the first line, we use a single equal sign in order to assign this value, that is the apple string, to the variable fruit string. If you're not sure how this works, you can always check out the video. I will link it at the top somewhere. And on the second line, we are printing out the result of an operation, that is the two equal signs, done on the variable. We are comparing the variable fruit to the string apple, and if they are equal, then the result is going to be true. So if I right click and I run, there we go. You can see that I get a true, and I'm going to dock it right here. So as you can see in here, what I did is I put the expression into a variable, calling it the Boolean expression, and then I printed out this expression. I also printed out the type of the variable that we're getting using the type method, and you can see right here that it is of class Boolean. We're going to look deeper into classes later on. But going forward, I'm not going to be setting them in variables and simply printing out the expressions directly. This is just for clarification on how things work. Now keep in mind, when comparing two strings, you have to be careful of the uppercase and lowercase. If I make this into apples with an uppercase A, right click and run, you can see that now it returns false. This is because it's case sensitive. Now what you can do in here is apply a function we learned in a previous video, that is the dot lower. So right here on the fruit I say dot lower, and this will take down any uppercase letters to the lowercase, and now when we compare it with apple with a lowercase, you can see that the result is true. Okay, so what we did in here, first of all, I commented out all of these lines using the Ctrl//, and I added a comment that in here we were checking the equality. But we can also check the inequality using this exclamation mark equal signs, which allows you to determine if two variables are not equal to each other. Like for example, country is set to USA, but country is different than China, and that actually goes into the true. It's actually true because they are different. And in here, if I type in USA, for example, right click and run, you'll see that the result is false because we are checking for inequality, and it returns true when they are not equal to each other. Okay, so now we are looking at numerical comparisons. As you can see, we can use the same operators on our integers, where we have age equal to 27. This is an integer variable, and we compare it with 25, or we check for the equality. And it turns out that 27 is not equal to 25, but it's not equal, using the inequality operator, it's not equal to 25, and we get a true. Okay, so what I'm doing in here is I'm using mathematical numerical comparisons to check if the value is greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. So you can see that, and I also added a string to make things more clear. So you can see right here, age greater than 27, that is false. The age is equal to 27, and we can see this reflected in the second line where age is greater than or equal to 27. This will be very handy when working and expanding your programs. So keep those in mind, same things hold true. So age less than or equal to 27, that's true. But is age less than 27? No, it's not, so it's a false. We can also check for multiple conditions. So as you can see right here, we have two conditions related with the AND. Sometimes you might need to have two or more conditions to be true in order to take a certain action. In here, we need both conditions to be true to evaluate into a true. We do this using the AND keyword. So you can see that the age must be greater than 100 and the country must be equal to USA in order to get a true. If one of these conditions is not satisfied, like for example the age must be greater than 108, when I right click and I run, I get a false. Even though this condition is satisfied, this one is not, so we get a false in total. So right here, what I did is I'm using, instead of the AND keyword, I'm using the OR keyword. And just to refresh your memory, if you want to duplicate a line, just click anywhere on the line and hit Ctrl D to duplicate it. And if you want to move it around really nicely, or in a very cool way, you can hold down Shift, Alt, and use the arrow keys to move it up and down. But anyway, that's beside the point. As you can see in here, we are using something called the OR. Now this is a slightly different than the AND keyword, because if I right click and I run, you'll see that I get a true. Why? Because only one of these conditions must be satisfied in order to get a true output. If we're using an AND, both must be true. When we're using an OR, if all of them are false, like for example, if I change this to China as well, now this condition is false and this condition is false. Because both of them are false, I finally get a false. But if only one of them is true, like for example, let me change this back to 100. If only one of them is true, we get the output true. Okay, sometimes it's important to check whether a list contains a certain value before taking a certain action. So in here, the keyword in Python allows you to check for the existence of banana in your favorite fruits or for the orange in your favorite fruits. So banana is indeed present inside of the favorite fruits list, so we have a true, but the orange is not, so we get a false. If you don't know anything about lists, then I recommend that you watch the video that I will link right here at the top. And of course, this is also case sensitive, so if I change this from a lowercase a to a uppercase a and I run, you can see that I get false, because banana with an uppercase a in the middle is not present in the favorite fruits, only banana with a lowercase. And other times it's important to know if a value does not appear in a list. So you can use the keyword not in this situation. For example, grape not in favorite fruits returns true. Why? Because just like we were checking for the inequality, we're checking that the grape is not in the favorite fruits, and indeed it's not, so we return a true. Apple, on the other hand, is present in the favorite fruits, so apple not in favorite fruits returns a false. Okay, so we've looked at conditional tests. Now it's time to put them to work when working with if statements. Let's go ahead and continue on. Okay, so now it's time to use the evaluations that we get to change how our program behaves based on these expressions. You can put any conditional test in this line right here, where we have the if statement, and just about any action in the indented block that we have below. We've already covered what indentations are in the for loops, so make sure to check that out as well. If the conditional test right here evaluates to a true, then Python will execute the code in the following if statements, or any line for that matter. And if the test evaluates to a false, Python will ignore the code following the if statement. So right here you can see that the variable x is equal to 100. X, is it greater than 50? Yes, it is. So this evaluation is, or this expression is equal to true. It's a true. So if true, we will do whatever is in this block, which means we will print out x is greater than 50. If I change this x from 100 to 12, right click and run, you can see that first of all, the expression evaluates to a false, and we don't get anything printed out because the code inside of this if statement will not execute. But what if we actually wanted to get an output if this expression is false? So as you can see in here, we have the else statement attached to the if statement. So what happens is if the first expression evaluates to a false, we get whatever is in the else block of code. As you can see right here, x is not greater than 50. But if we change this from 100 or from 12 to 120, right click and run, now we only get x is greater than 50 and we don't execute whatever is in the else block. And just like we've had with the for loops, you can always add multiple lines, and no matter how many lines you add, all of them will be executed as long as they are part of the same block of code and have the same level of indentation. So oftentimes you'll need to test more than two possible situations, and to evaluate these you can use the elif block or syntax. It's called the elif syntax. Right click and run, and as you can see right here, 12 is less than, or it's not greater than 50 at least, so we don't get this line printed out, but we also don't get the else printed out. Instead, what we do get is this line printed out. So keep in mind that only one of the blocks will get executed. So you can see right here 12, it's not greater than 50, but it is less than 20. So this expression right here evaluates to a true. You can even test it out right here if I duplicate it and make it less than 20. Right click and run. You can see that evaluates to a true, which means this block is working, which means we print out at least it's less than 20. And again, keep in mind, if I do the following, what do you think the output is going to be? Just take a second and think about it. Of course, when I right click and I run, you'll see that x is greater than 50, even though it doesn't make sense. But because this expression evaluates to a true, that means we execute this block of code and we get the following output. Okay, so as you can see in here, we can add multiple elifs one after the other. And it's very important to keep in mind that the hierarchy is important, because remember, only one of the expressions is going to be executed and one of the blocks of code are going to be expressed. I'll show you what that means in just a bit. But as you can see in here, we have the age equals to 33. So this condition is not working, or at least it evaluates to false. This expression evaluates to a false, this one as well, and finally we have this expression that has a small squiggly line under it that we're going to talk about. You can see right here, simplified chain comparison. We'll see that in just a bit. But before we do that, the age is equal to 33, which means it's greater than 20 and it's less than 65. So this person is an adult. This block of code does indeed execute. And if we change this to 1, for example, right click and run, you can see that this person is a baby. And if I change this to 12, right click and run, this person is a kid, etc, etc. You get the point. Now this is what I mean when I say hierarchy is very important. I will select this line, hold down Shift Alt and move it up. So now we check for the 20 before the 13, and when I right click and I run, you'd expect that somebody who's 12 should be a kid, right? But when I right click and I run, you'll see that somebody that's under 12 is a teenager, which is not correct. But the way that we've written our program now, and I don't want you to do this, because of the way that we've written the program, we evaluate this expression, it turns out that it's true, and we get the following output. So I've taken it back right here. Now let's look at the simplified chain comparison. If I right click and I show context and action, you can see that I can change this to a simplified chain comparison. And if I click on that, you can see that I get a simpler expression of this. Now, if you're using a IDE that's different than PyCharm, that's okay, you might not get this, but anyways, you can write this way. And finally, in here, instead of using this elif, we could have simply typed in else. Not ellipse, we could have written else. Why? Because anything that's other than these values, like for example, I don't know, 9,000, will evaluate to this person is old. If I had kept the elif as before, if I did 9,000 again, you'll see that that person is indeed still old. So sometimes you might be able to use the elif instead of the else instead of the elif. Okay, so now that we've looked at how conditional tests work and we've applied them to our if statements and made use of them, it's time to again apply these if statements or make them work with lists. Let's continue on. Okay, so what I did in here is I combined if statements with lists. So I have the list of my favorite fruits. I have my fruit right here, that is apple, and I'm checking if the fruit is not in the favorite fruit, and we've already seen how we can do this in our conditional testing right here. So if the fruit is not in the favorite fruits, then I'm going to print out this is a disgrace because apples are amazing or whatever. And the same thing holds true in here. If this condition evaluates to a false, that means that we get an else, meaning that if the apple is indeed inside of fruits, then this is a good list. If I change this to pineapple, right click and run, now you can see that this is a disgrace because pineapples is amazing, or pineapple is amazing. So if I right click and I run, you'll see that as always we print out all of our variables. But there is a small hidden problem in here that you need to avoid at all costs. Now at first sight you might be thinking, oh wait, there's no problem in here, everything is working fine, there's no error, there's no warnings. But there is indeed a problem because we have a temporary variable created on the for loops, and again, if you don't know what this is, you can always refer back to the for loops video that I made. And we also have a variable outside of this temporary variable, outside of the context of the for loop, that is the fruit, and this is very bad. You always need to have different variable names because this can cause confusion for you and confusion for the Python interpreter. So I'm going to change this to be called favorite fruit. Okay, so what I did in here is I went through the list of fruits, and every single time I accessed an item inside of the favorite fruits, I put it in the temporary variable that is fruit, and then I checked if the fruit is equal to my favorite fruit. I gave it a special output where I said that this fruit is the best. Otherwise, I simply printed out the fruit as normal. So if I change this to cherry, now I get apple printed out normally and cherry is printed out in a special way. Okay, so now we are working with two lists at the same time. First of all, we have the available items in our local store, and then we have the groceries that we want to buy. So what I did is I went through the groceries that we have, and I checked every single item inside, and I put it inside of the items temporary variable. So if the item is not in the available items, I'm going to print out that this item is not available. So for example, in here we're trying to buy apples, but if we look in our available items, we don't have apples, so we print out the apples are not available. And this is a very nifty way of working with two lists at the same time and having, well, a very nice output. Okay, so we've covered conditional tests, we've looked at if statements, and we've seen how if statements work with lists. Now it's time for a bit of a challenge, or when I say challenge, it means you have to challenge your knowledge or the knowledge that you've learned so far in a mini project. So, congratulations! You just landed a new job as a data scientist after finishing the course at 2M Python Dev. You need to analyze some data. Welcome to the boring world. First of all, you'll need to print out the length of this list. You'll have a list down below in the comment. It's a big list, so copy it, paste it, don't write it out yourself. Print out the length of this list. Next, you'll need to create a loop over this entire list. You should be familiar with this if you've done the previous video. Inside this loop, we need to do the following. So, first of all, you'll need to print out how many integers, floats, and strings there are. This is a list of different integers, floats, and strings. You need to count every single one of these. Next, you'll need to print out how many even and odd integers there are, because floats and strings cannot be even or odd, so this is where you start using if statements. You actually start using it right here, but this is where it becomes very important. Next, you'll need to print out how many positive and negative numbers there are. Remember, floats can be negative as well as integers. You'll need to get what is the maximum and the minimum number in this entire list, including integers and floats. I recommend that you use the max and min. We've already seen these before. You can even Google how it works. What is the average length of a string in this list? Now, this is a bit of a harder challenge. If you're very ambitious and you've done everything correctly, you can do the following. You need to get the average length of the strings that we have. What is the average value of the numbers? Also a very challenging part, but you can do it. And here's a hint, you will need to use the nested if statements. It's just like normal if statements, you just have an if statement inside of an if statement. It's like if statement inception. I don't think I will keep this in the video. But anyways, and you can also use the type or the is instance. So I recommend that you Google this and you look at how it works in order to separate the integers and the floats and the strings. And of course, you need, for every single one of these, you need to initialize a variable at the top and then modify it inside of the main huge for loop. So pause the video right now and go do the challenge. Okay, so as you can see, we got our data list and it's just a list of different and random integers, floats, and strings. And because it's a huge list, most IDEs will have a small little arrow right here that you can press just to compress it, because we don't need to look at it all the time. In here, I initialized all of my counters based on the challenge that we've had. You can see I looked at all of the challenges. I determined, okay, I need 3 variables right here, 2 right here, 2 right here, etc., etc. So I initialized everything, and actually in here, instead of writing int underscore count equals 0, then float underscore count equals 0, etc., I just wrote them on a single line, just like I did in here, And finally, this is the weird part that you probably weren't sure how to do. instead of writing 0, which is perfectly normal, you can make it minus infinity because we're looking for the maximum number. So we write it as minus infinity using this float. Don't worry if you didn't figure this one out, it's a bit advanced. If you did, found it in some research, that's great. Finally, we did the main important task in here, which is printing out the length of our data list, which turns out has 347 items in it. Okay, so in here what I did is I created a for loop over the entire data list, and every single time I accessed an item, I put it in the temporary variable that is the item. Then I looked up isInstance and I understood how it works, where if let me hover over it and see if it provides me any documentation, and you can see first of all we presented with an object. Don't worry if you didn't fully understand this, on the internet you probably found a much cleaner resource. And the second one is the class that we're looking to compare this with. So first of all I check if it's an integer. If it is, then I increase the integer count. Then I checked if it's a float. If it is, using an elif, of course. If it is, then I increase the float count, and finally I increase the string count if it turned out to be a string, and finally I printed all of this out. So as you can see from our data, we have 119 integers, 116 floats, and 112 strings, which is a very nice equal variation between them. Oh, and by the way, before I continue, if you didn't even get to this point or you were having a big trouble on how to do the rest, if this helps you, you can pause the video at any point and just continue the challenge yourself. Don't feel pressured that you had to do everything from scratch, or you feel that maybe it's embarrassing that you didn't do the first part, so now you don't do the second part. No, doesn't matter. It's about doing your best. If you feel that this was a very nice step for you to move forward, pause the video, continue forward. Okay, so what I did in here is I checked for even and odd, and the way I did this is I took this item and I used the modulo 2 on it, and if it's equal to 0, which means that there is no remainder, and I believe we've covered this. If you weren't sure how to do this, a simple search would have given you the answer. If the modulo of 2 is equal to 0, meaning that we don't have any remainder when we divide this item by 2, then we increase the even count, otherwise we increase the odd count using the if-else syntax. Oh, and I printed it out as well. Turns out we have 116 even integers and 3 odd ones. Okay, so this time, because we can have positive numbers if they are integers, and we can have positive or negative numbers if they are floats, I had to copy and paste this code in 2 places. Now, something very important that you need to keep in mind is whenever you find yourself copying and pasting code and using it multiple times, it means that you're starting to get redundant code and that there is probably a better way of writing this. But since we still haven't taken functions, this will be covered in subsequent videos. But again, sometimes, as we'll see, we can even reformat this to make it better. And I also, of course, printed out the positive and negatives, and as you can see, we have 118 positives and 117 negatives. Very nice distribution. Okay, so again, what we did in here, and this is part of the challenge that I told you was a bit challenging, well, that's the whole point, is using the max, and I did a mistake in here. We use the min and the min. See, when you duplicate, you have to be very careful, making sure that everything is correct before you duplicate or move on. So the max number that we've already established was negative infinity. What we do is we compare it with the item that we currently have, and the max allows us to get the higher number. So we provided with as many arguments as we want. In this case, we provided it with minus infinity and the first item, which was the nebula. Well, thankfully, we already had an if statement in here that made sure that we're dealing with an integer. So whatever the integer was, turns out that the item, let's say it was minus 9,876, that is much bigger than minus infinity, so now the max number became minus 9,000, etc. If we come up to 1, where item is equal to 1, then the max is 1, that means the max number becomes max. And we keep comparing until we get to the highest number, and we do the same in the integer, or when the item is an integer and when the item is a float. But again, in here we have copy and pasted code, so alarm bells must be going off in your head. And we can see that, I didn't print it out, you can see that the maximum number is 11,300 and the lowest number is 9,876, which was the first integer that we encounter. Nice. Okay, so what I did in here is I got the total string length. So every time we encountered a string item, we got its length and we added it to the total string length. So once we've added up the total string length, we took that average by taking the total string length and dividing it by the string count, and then we printed it out, and it turns out that on average each string that we have has a 7.616 length. Okay, so what I did in here is I created a new if statement, keep in mind, inside of the for loop because it's indented, and what I did is I got the total number of value and added the item every single time. And I made sure that in here that when I checked for the instance that it is an integer and a float at the same time, and I passed it as a tuple. This is a tuple. If you remember from a previous video, you can look back. Why did I use the tuple, or how did I even know that I should use a tuple? When I hover over the instance, you can see in here I can provide the type, I can provide a tuple of types. So always read the documentation. You can even see an example in here of how you can use it, where A and B are the different types, and then we have X. And once I added everything, I divided the total number value by the integer count and the float count added together, because remember, these are all numbers, and it turns out that the average count is 2,590. Now, remember when I told you when you're copying and pasting numbers, that is not good at all. So since I've created this if statement, now I can actually cut this from here, paste it in here, and I can even remove all of this unnecessary code right here. And if I right click and I run, I should have the same numbers outputted, but I was able to save myself the copy and pasting, and that is always very, very important. I was able to do this. Why? Because we were using this code when it's an integer, and we were using this code when it was a float. So I created an if statement that combines these two, and then I printed out. And by the way, we could have even used an elif in here and added it to this chain, but I felt that was not necessary. And then in case it wouldn't be even correct, because if we added this, then the integers would be caught on the first if statement and the floats would be caught on the second one, so this one wouldn't work. That's why I separated it into another if right here. My fellow Python programmers, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you feel that I deserve it, please make sure to leave a like. If you feel that you want to watch more content like this, also leave a subscription. By the time you're watching this video, I probably uploaded part 2. I maybe even uploaded more advanced topics, so make sure to watch these. The video will be right here somewhere. Okay, so thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed again, and hopefully I will see you later on. Bye bye for now.